Now, the ISACA has a risk IT framework that's based on a set of guiding principles and feature business processes and management guidelines to conform to those principles. Now, to get a good understanding of risk, you need to know what risk is. The ISO published a definition of risk as the potential that a given threat will exploit vulnerabilities of an asset and thereby cause harm to the organization. Now, I'm thinking, okay, that's great. They just told you what risk is, but they threw a bunch of other words in there. Exploits, vulnerabilities. Okay, so let's make sure we got this completely fleshed out, that it makes sense to us. Everything that we see has a vulnerability, and I can't think of any exception. A vulnerability can be a design vulnerability. It can be, if we're going to talk strictly software. We see lots of releases about vulnerabilities in Microsoft Windows and patches that we use to fix those vulnerabilities. What does that vulnerability mean? It means that if somebody has the right knowledge and the right access, they could take advantage of that vulnerability and destroy that operating system, or worse than that, take it over. Well, let's take that idea of risk. I want to make it an easy to see picture. If you have a building, a brick and mortar facility that your office is in, I'm betting it's got a vulnerability to fire, right? Probably doesn't do well if it catches on fire. That is a vulnerability. Now, just because it has the vulnerability is not that big of a deal. I mean, it's a big deal to some extent. I don't want to be in that building if it catches fire. But it needs somebody to exploit that vulnerability, right? To set that place on fire purposely or accidentally. And until that exploit occurs, there's the building. It has a vulnerability, but it hasn't been exploited. The risk is, what are the odds that vulnerability will be exploited? Now, it could be an electrical fire, a completely innocent way of starting. It can be from, anything you think of, from arsonists or any number of things that can cause that, lightning strikes, all sorts of things. So what you do is you analyze what are the risks, what are the, buildings like this and those types of crimes or those types of experiences, how likely are they to occur? What can I do to reduce that risk? Like the addition of sprinklers inside the building, water sprinklers right overhead. That's why we put them in there. We're reducing those vulnerabilities. Anyway, so I'm spending a lot of time trying to make sure that you've got a good picture of the definition of risk, using the other words that they threw in there, like the exploits and vulnerabilities. And of course, that brick and mortar building that I talked about, that's the actual asset that we're trying to protect. Now, when you're analyzing IT services, the auditor should specifically be looking at the risks that are associated for the business when using IT services within an enterprise. And that is going to be our focus. What are those risks involving IT? Now, one of the goals of risk analysis is that we're going to, hopefully, by doing the analysis, figure out where the vulnerabilities are, to figure out what the potential that those vulnerabilities can be exploited, which is the risk, and then ways that we can mitigate the chances of that happening, at least to a manageable point. If I go back to that idea of the building and putting sprinkler systems in there, knowing that those sprinkler systems can reduce, hopefully, at least the damage, but we know that fire could still start, right? In order for the sprinklers to go off, there must be smoke and fire. But it's not going to damage or destroy the entire building. At least we hope not. Maybe one room or one small section. And then we ask the question, is that manageable? Are we willing to live with that level of risk? And that's what we're looking at. And you might say, yeah, one room, that's great. Out of 100,000 square feet, we can live with that risk. We can deal with that. We can move those people to another room that's still functioning until it gets fixed and repaired. So that's kind of the goal. One of the goals, anyway, of risk analysis is mitigating that risk, lowering the amount of risk to a manageable point. And this can be very crucial to a business, especially one that relies heavily on the support of IT. So, I keep using the building and fire because I think I can paint a better mental picture in describing what what risk analysis is and how it helps us in lowering or mitigating risks. But I want you to take that same mental picture and now think of a database server. right? And how crucial is the data on that database server to your company? Could you live without it? If you lost it and it took you a week to recreate the information in there, could your business still run? If those were all your customers and the only information about those customers and all the orders they've just placed are all stored there, how are you going to, recover from that? How crucial is it to you? So you're getting the picture, right? I'm trying to paint a couple of mental pictures so that you really understand the goal of risk analysis. And the reason that's a big deal is that we see the use of risk and the risk analysis in many facets of what we do in the auditing world. All right, so as kind of a review, the risk of an exploit to a vulnerability could negatively impact things like the assets of the organization. And I like this. We're using vague terms. The assets are what's important to you and your company. All right, so I've given you some examples. They can negatively impact processes or objectives of the business. Certainly, they could object, if it was the database of customers, it's going to, impact the ability for me to know what product the customer bought and where to ship it and that sort of stuff. That can damage us financially. It could also lead to us being in violation of regulatory requirements. Some of these could cause operational outages. It was a few years ago in the early part of the 2000s that some operator at an air tower, I think in Mexico, entered a value in that was like 4 characters too long for the field, and it caused a buffer overflow and crashed the air control system, and flights, not only in Mexico but the U.S., couldn't fly because it was broken. That's an operational outage, and that was one that had a negative impact on the industry. Again, I'm trying to paint pictures for you about these different types of things. All right, so again, they're just examples of how the exploit of a vulnerability can be a negative impact in the corporation. Now, risk assessment can be characterized as a life cycle. The life cycle is we first start by identifying what does this business do, what are the objectives of the business, and then as it regards to information, what are the information assets that are the most important for this business. And that is going to be our primary goal of protecting the most important part of the information. Now, that also means that if, let's say, it was a database of customers, all right, that means that not only do we need to protect where it's stored, and not only is that, the objectives is to work with our customers, to sell things to our customers. That's what our business does. So the information asset about our customers is very important to us. That means we need to be looking at risk assessments of the systems that are generating that information and storing that information and manipulating that information. So risk assessment should first focus on the most crucial assets that could do the most damage or be the most costly impact to the organization. So that means that customer database sounds like it's a bigger deal than making sure the intranet bulletin that tells us what's being served at the cafeteria is available for me to see today. Yeah, those are both data. Customers, cafeteria menu. Obviously, we're going to go after the more important information, the one that we can do with, that we cannot do without, and that's what we should first focus on.